Hello and welcome to Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thank you for joining us. We have plenty to talk about this week. The state's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the political chaos that rocked the nation's capital last week, the Mississippi Legislature's 2021 session, and the state's newly ratified state flag. This morning, we have two excellent journalists to help us unpack all of this news. Joining me in studio is 12 News senior political correspondent Gerald Harris, and joining us via Zoom is Adam Ganucheau. He's the editor-in-chief with our partners at MississippiToday.com. Adam and Gerald, welcome back to Mississippi Insight. Let's jump right into this discussion this morning. Let's begin with the governor's briefing on Tuesday on the COVID-19 pandemic. We heard a lot from Governor Reeves on the topic of vaccination. Certainly, we've been watching our infection and death tolls rising across the state. Both are at worse levels now than during the summer. Adam, how much pressure does this governor face in terms of getting pandemic response right?
It's a great question, Byron. You know, the governor, we're right at a year since he took office. I think, second, third week of January of 2020 is when he took over. So looking back on this year, I think you have to do that as you're thinking about, what he's doing right now. It's been a very tumultuous year, to say the very least. It's even outside of the pandemic, we've had natural disasters that he's had to respond to. We've had a budget crisis. We've had, a major debate with the state flag, as you mentioned, Byron. I know we'll probably talk about that a little later, but, we've seen some recent polling in the last couple of weeks that shows that, the governor enjoys very, very little support right now from Mississippians. And as we've reported, as I know that Gerald and y'all have reported, that support that he does have really isn't, making a dent sort of in what his numbers have been in the past. There's just sort of this fracture among so many different blocks of voters, Republican, Democrats, white, black, male, female, you name the demographic. He's not doing super well right now. So, you ask about his response right now during this sort of period of distributing vaccines, COVID vaccines, which so many people, Mississippians and otherwise, are relying on to hopefully return to some normalcy. I'd say that it's important for him to get this right. He doesn't have a lot of room to, mess this up right now, at least in terms of, how he's perceived by Mississippians. And that's certainly something that we're keeping a close eye on.
And Gerald, you were at that briefing this week. What are your thoughts on the governor's push on the vaccines?
Well, I think it was striking that the governor at first, when he was asked about whether or not he would take the vaccine, he said, I will wait until it was my turn to take the vaccine. He's certainly not over 65, nor is he over 75 like Commissioner Mike Chaney, who did take a vaccine yesterday because he did meet those criteria. It's important to note that at this point, he decided to do that vaccination to, I guess, show an example to Mississippians about his willingness to take the vaccine, but he just opened it up to the greater number of people 65 and older. So it remains to be seen whether or not they can handle the influx of people that are 65 and older that would want to get this vaccine. There's about 20,000 plus people in the state of Mississippi who are 75 years and older, so there's not a lot of pull for a lot of vaccines to be given out, especially when you have a federal contract that they're hoping to get up and running. But it's really going to be seen whether or not Mississippians are seeing this as a chance to really trust the vaccination, and whether or not the governor can be genuine in his response.
Do either of you sense pressure on the governor to reinstate a statewide mask mandate?
I don't think that there's a lot of pressure on the governor, political or otherwise, at this point to do a statewide mask mandate, because I think the governor is trying to avoid those headlines of statewide mask mandate, especially when you have the vaccines rolling out and more people are going to be come online and be allowed to get the vaccination. So I think he's going to try to steer away from, if at all possible, a statewide mask mandate. Adam?
We've heard for, as you said, for several months, calls for the governor to issue a statewide mask mandate. He was the first governor in America to rescind a statewide mask mandate earlier in 2020. I think everything that, of course, you've asked him these questions and you've been tough with him on it. All of his answers to that question have been pretty much, I don't think it's the government's place to tell Mississippians what to do, and I'm not going to take that step in the future. So, I think any hope of another statewide mask mandate from Tate Reeves is probably not going to be realized, at least in the next few weeks.
Well, COVID-19 wasn't the only thing discussed at that briefing, Gerald. You asked the governor about his ties to President Donald Trump following last week's ride to the U.S. Capitol. Here's part of that exchange with the governor.
Governor, you mentioned lowering the flags for the Capitol police officer. Are you still proud of the support that you've received from President Donald Trump? Do you think he should resign?
Well, I believe that the events that transpired at the Capitol last week were disastrous. I don't think anyone can look at those events and say anything otherwise. It was a sad day in our nation's history, and as I not only watched those events unfold, as I spoke to people who at the time who were in Washington, D.C., what I chose to do is to self-reflect and say, what have all of us done, and what have any of us done to raise the political rhetoric to a point at which this transpires? And so when I think about that, it's certainly no doubt that in this country we are as much divided today as at any time, at least in the last 150 years. And that is a problem. And I think all of us would be well served to take a step back, to not only self-reflect on our own actions, but also self-reflect on the actions of others. And let's recognize that in this country, we settle our political disputes by debating on the floor of the House of Representatives, and by debating on the floor of the United States Senate, by debating on the floor of the Mississippi House of Representatives, debating on the floor of the Mississippi Senate. And sometimes we win, sometimes we don't, but the reality is we literally have to recognize that that is the way in which our system works.
Gerald, what do you make of the governor's response there?
Well, he didn't answer the two questions that I proposed to him. The first question being, are you still encouraged by the support that you've had previously from the president? He didn't answer that, nor did he answer whether or not the president should resign in the wake of the events at the United States Capitol. But he did get the talking points that most Republicans have gotten so far. That is to denounce the violence at the Capitol, say it's the time now for healing and reconciliation. And I think that that's the game plan that you've heard during the impeachment debate for the second time that President Trump is being impeached. And that's what you're going to hear going forward, is that at this moment now that Republicans want to unite the country behind a common cause. But again, this was the same governor who, during his election a year ago, 2 years ago rather, it was on air with some of those divisive rhetorics, such as calling his opponent liberal and associating him with other members of the Democratic Party. Now, that's all fair game, but when it comes to a point like this, I think that everyone should be accountable for their actions and their previous actions and their associations with individuals.
Earlier this week, the state's junior senator, U.S. Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, commented on the riot in Washington. 12 News asked her whether she believes the president bears any responsibility for inciting the protesters. Let's listen to that.
We were sitting in our desk in the chamber. I was at my desk, and we could hear the crowd growing louder. And then we were instructed to get out of the chamber and go to a safe location. It was a tough day Wednesday for our country. It was a sad day Wednesday for our country. We are ready to prosecute those that came in.
Senator, does President Trump have any responsibility for his language that provoked this thing at the Capitol building?
I cannot answer that. I mean, the investigations are going on, and it was just a really sad day for everybody involved. But thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it.
Adam, talk about this delicate balance for Republican leaders here and in Washington between condemning the political violence and sympathizing with the views of their fellow Trump supporters.
Yeah, Byron, I think, what was striking to me with both the clip that you played a minute ago of Governor Reeves and then this one of Senator Hyde-Smith. As Gerald said, the governor didn't answer the question directly, and neither did Cindy Hyde-Smith. Does President Trump have responsibility for what happened in Washington? The exact answer that Cindy Hyde-Smith just gave, I believe, word for word, was, I cannot answer that question. That's just completely inaccurate on its face, of course, but I think the reason that she can't answer that question is because she didn't know what the talking point was yet. I mean, we just had a president who was impeached, first U.S. president in the history of this country, impeached 2 different times, and the charge that the House impeached him on was incitement of insurrection. They laid out the evidence. There was a pretty close partisan split vote in the House, and we'll see what the Senate ends up doing with it. But just right now, this past week, we saw a lot of talk among Republican Senate leaders like Mitch McConnell, the outgoing Senate Majority Leader, who hasn't ruled out voting yes on convicting President Trump of that impeachment charge. So, look, Cindy Hyde-Smith, she has dodged every question under the sun about anything of importance to Mississippi. That's during this last campaign in 2020 and during her first campaign in 2018 during the special election. I just think that, Mississippians are looking to our leaders for leadership on this issue. Governor Reeves said it himself. We haven't been this divided, and we look to our leaders for guidance, and they're refusing to answer these questions at this time. I think is something that certainly we as journalists are calling out, and we're going to keep trying to hold them accountable. But we'll see where Cindy Hyde-Smith lands, especially if Senate Republican leadership ends up voting to convict. I would imagine, like many other issues, she's going to go along with that leadership. And the reason she says she can't answer the question is because she didn't know where that leadership fell yet.
And Gerald, your thoughts on that?
Well, the fact of the matter is that she has a 6-year term. She has more job security. And Mississippians don't send Democrats to the United States Senate. And so she has more opportunity to do this. And another interesting point is about money. You see that a lot of these companies are pulling away from particular candidates. Well, Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith didn't have any money to start with. She was the last senator in the entire United States Congress that wasn't retiring, that pulled up, that raised the least amount of money. So she can vote however she wants to, and she decided to throw away. She wanted votes from Pennsylvania thrown away. She wanted votes from different areas thrown away. But the bottom line is that she has this position that she's in. It's a unique position where she doesn't have to answer to anyone anymore.
Well, we'll talk more about the political turmoil and how Mississippi leaders fit into the big picture when Mississippi Insight continues after this break. Welcome back to Mississippi Insight. I'm here with 2 of the smartest people covering Mississippi politics this week. Mississippi Today's Ganucheau and 12 News' Gerald Harris. Let's talk more about Mississippi's congressional delegation and the political violence that we saw at the U.S. Capitol. 2 of those members, House Republicans Michael Gast and Trent Kelly, met with some of the protesters who rallied outside the Capitol last week. Mississippi Today found this photo on Facebook showing Gast and Kelly posing with members of the Patriot Party of Mississippi. That group promotes content from right-wing and white nationalist websites and social media pages. An aide to Congressman Gast said that the meeting was nowhere near the active protest at the Capitol, and both Gast and Kelly condemned the violence that happened later in the day. Adam, your team has done some investigating of this particular group. Tell us what you learned.
Yeah, so the first thing I'm going to mention right off the top is that we have no evidence of anybody in this group who the Congressman Gast and Kelly met with. We have no evidence that they entered the Capitol at any point or committed other crimes. We were very clear in our reporting about that, and I think that's important to say. However, as you said, Byron, we have done some sort of poking and prodding into what this group believes. I think it's notable that 2 sitting congressmen from Mississippi chose to meet with this group, and this group espouses all kinds of radical thoughts. We co-published an article with the DeSoto Times-Tribune about they had a meeting after they got back from Washington. They had a gathering in DeSoto County at a park, and some of their quotes, some of the quotes that the leaders said at that rally, at that meeting, of about 60 to 75 people were jarring. I mean, all the way up until the point that you can kind of read between lines and see threats of violence against Senator Roger Wicker, a sitting Republican U.S. senator. So, thought it was important to sort of, show Mississippians who their congressman spent time meeting with. It's a scary time. It's a scary place. And this group, they've really said some scary things.
And Gerald, should we be surprised that the groups like this exist in Mississippi, or surprised that there's not more of them?
No, and I believe there are more of them. I mean, we in Mississippi have the great fortune of having one of the chairs of the Homeland Security Committees here, and he's talked about this, he's produced reports about this, and the FBI has been talking about this for a very long time. White supremacist, extreme right-wing groups becoming a domestic terrorist threat for many Mississippians, many Americans. This is not a new conversation. We're just seeing the actions of those conversations, whether or not Americans watch it on the House or Senate floors, watch it in committee meetings, or read those bulletins sent out. But this was not a spur of the moment situation. This was not a spur of the moment group. These are groups that have strong ties to different organizations. And the FBI has said it over and over again. The chairman of the House Homeland Security, Benny Thompson, has said it over again. These threats remain today. They've remained since about the 90s, and we're starting to see them come into fruition with all of these different protests and things of that nature.
All right, we'll be back with Gerald Harris and Ganucheau after a short break. You're watching Mississippi Insight on WJTV 12 News. And welcome back to Mississippi Insight. Let's look at the legislative affairs now. Gerald, earlier this week, you attended a briefing by the Legislative Black Caucus. What did they have to say about the 2021 session, and what are we expecting?
Yeah, they've said the same thing that they've said the last 2 years that I've been covering the Legislative Black Caucus and entering into a new session. They say they want to expand health care. They say that they want criminal justice reform. They want education fully funded. But these all come at a political price. There's some appetite for it in the Senate. There may be less appetite for it on the House side, but you have, again, a situation where, Adam talked about this earlier, a governor that remains unpopular, even among legislative members. And how do you, as a Legislative Black Caucus and the Democratic Caucus, work to leverage that like they did last time on the Mississippi state flag and other COVID-19 relief? They're keeping the doors open to allow their caucus to vote en bloc to push some of those legislative priorities. Although reality has set in that maybe perhaps some of these big grand ideas won't go through, and that's just part of the being in a 2/3 minority.
And Adam, what will you be watching out for in the coming weeks with the legislature?
Yeah, I think the big thing, or two big things, there's this push to eliminate the state's income tax. The income tax makes up about a third, maybe a little bit more than a third of our state's annual general fund revenue. So, if they were to do that, then there would be some major questions about how state agencies are going to fund basic services for Mississippians. Second thing we're watching out for is any kind of teacher pay increase. We have, on average, the lowest paid teachers of any state in the nation. Because of that, among other things, we also have this very critical teacher shortage of public school teachers who can't fill open jobs across the state and school districts across the state. We're watching legislation that will be moving on both of those sort of education-related issues that, certainly could impact the future of Mississippi in a pretty profound way.
Finally, I'd like to get your thoughts on our new state flag. Many Mississippians feel it was long overdue. And Adam, you're a native Mississippian. You've grown up watching the old Confederate theme flag waving atop our state buildings. What are your thoughts on the significance of this new flag?
Byron, it's a crazy thing. I mean, I've walking into the Capitol where I am right now, talking to you, seeing that flag flying is pretty surreal. I hadn't really thought about whether or not I'd see that change in my lifetime being a native Mississippian, but it certainly happened. And I think also adding to that, the fact that it happened during such a crazy year, 2020, during the pandemic, as there were major other legislative issues at hand, I think is a pretty incredible thing. So seeing that flag, I know I've talked to several legislators this week about that, seeing that flag being raised for the first time above the Capitol and across the state in an official capacity has been special just to so many Mississippians who have been forced really for generations and generations, 126 years of Mississippians who have been forced to be represented by that old hateful image that's now retired and gone forever. It's a special thing.
And Gerald, no one suggested a new flag will solve the problems here in Mississippi, but in your view, how important is it in finally cutting the particular link to the racist past of the state?
Well, I think to get the most precise perspective on this is talking to those black legislators who've looked at that flag as a symbol, as they did in the 60s, of whites only and black only restaurants. That's what the flag with the Confederate emblem mean to them, that under this building, our voices do not carry the same weight as our white counterparts. And I think at this moment, when you saw that flag come down and you saw a new flag, a flag that overwhelmingly was agreed upon by every section of Mississippians, you saw African-American legislators welcomed to the United States Capitol, working under a flag that they all can agree on will move the state forward.
All right, Gerald Harris, Adam Ganucheau, thanks for being with us on Mississippi Insight, and we'll be right back. Big thanks to our political journalism superstars this week. Adam Ganucheau with Mississippi Today and 12 News' own senior political correspondent Gerald Harris. Mississippi Insight returns next Sunday morning with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown. For all of us here at 12 News, make it a great weekend.